everyone. This is Fran Lewis, the Queen of Restream. And Dr. Cavuto and I are going to talk about five, five issues in reading. And I've got them right over here. And the first is the core problem. And then there's what good readers actually do. Where reading breaks down, I got this memorized, people. And instruction versus evaluation and whatever else we come up with, right?
Yep.
So the first one you said is core problem, right? I have that definition right here, I hope. A core problem, oh, I got to put the other glasses on. A core problem is reading comprehension, is the instability to construct meaning from text despite potentially having adequate decoding skills. Comprehension deficiency stems from weak language processing, limited vocabulary, poor inference, and a whole lot more. I'll let you take that one, and that is the definitions that I came up with, and I have the rest of them over here. So, how would you define core problem, and how do you deal with that?
Yes. In my opinion, friend, I think the core problem, if we were to identify one in terms of literacy and literacy instruction, I think the core problem is in the past, oh, let's say 2 or 3 decades, probably two, instead of looking at what is breaking down when children try to read, uh, what part of the reading process is breaking down, we're looking at what's wrong with the child. And I think that's simply the wrong question. And that's why we're going from 1985, uh, 75,000 children in the United States labeled learning disabled. This past year, 16 million. So just that one statistic alone, I think, makes the point that we may be looking at this the wrong way, this reading process. Instead of looking down, instead of looking at what part is breaking down for the child, we should, instead of looking at that, which is what I propose, we're looking at what's wrong with the child. And that's why we're coming up with a lot of medical sounding diagnoses as well.
Now I have the next one right here. I don't want to go out of order because I'm losing it today.
You go, how do
Okay,
you
that
like
goes
it?
there. The second one that you wanted to talk about, and this is to me one of the most important things in the world, is what good readers actually do. Because I've been speaking to people a lot, and I don't think that they process recognizing words accurately, process them automatically, connecting them to meaning, stay engaged with text, and reading is an active transaction. Kindred's process, not a static ability. And my niece the other day called me, and my nephew called me yesterday. We were talking about that
Huh?
because I said, yeah, he's 13, going on 27, and yeah, he's my brother-in-law's nephew. It's a long story. And Cooper told me that he got a 94, was his lowest grade. So I said, "You related to me?" He said, "Why?" I said, "Because if I got 94, I get grounded." For real. So how would you define what good readers do? Because that's a hard one.
Sure. Uh, uh, I think it was 1986 or 1990, a while back. I wrote my first book that I was, well, actually, it was, I had written a program for McGraw Hill before that. But the book was called Reading Assessment, a Problem Solving Approach. Reading Assessment, a Problem Solving Approach. In fact, I'm not advertising the book because it's long since out of print. But uh, I believe we still can get copies on Amazon if one were inclined. I still get copies from my students from way back then about that book. But in that book, I basically have this what I call a simple. I've now changed it to systematic reading
Yeah.
assessment model. We look at these five different things. We look at decoding. How well can the youngster figure out words? How well can he figure out printed words? Sometimes some people call that print translation, some call it word identification, Some call it word recognition. There's a big debate about that now. These things make me crazy because who cares what it's called? It's going from the print to the oral version. That's called decoding. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is decoding automaticity. Now, not only can the youngster read the words, but can he read them automatically? Does he read he, he caught okay, he decoded it accurately, but not automatically. Okay, when there's some kind of intervening, mediating process, we call that uh, lack of automaticity. Okay. By the way, a youngster who is decoding well but lacks automaticity is not going to be crazy about reading out loud because he's going to falter on many words. Other kids will jump in. The teacher will jump in. That's a tough one. Okay. Decoding. If you can't decode, oh, that's a huge problem. It would be like, if I may, by analogy, it would be like you or myself trying to read Braille. Yeah? Can you read Braille for anybody? For the blind, for raised indentations? I don't think so.
It's
Neither you nor I can read Braille. Uh, and so we would have a decoding problem, and decoding problems always cause comprehension problems, because if you can't decode the words, how could you possibly understand them? Okay, so we have decoding, decoding automaticity. Then we have word and world knowledge. Word knowledge is a fancy word for vocabulary, right? Vocabulary, or schemata, which is background knowledge. Both of those things are critically important in reading, because when we read, we don't just take information from the page, we bring information to it. It's called a reader text transaction. Then, then we look at the biggie, the one right this smack my model, which is reading comprehension. Now, every one of the aforementioned impact upon reading comprehension. If you can't decode, there's no way you can comprehend. No way. Number two, if you can decode, but you can't decode automatically, that's probably going to cause poor comprehension. Why? Because it's called a trade-off attention. You're giving so much attention trying to figure out the words that your brain might not be able to process them. I'm always amazed with youngsters who are not automatic, they still get it. That's remarkable. It's not really remarkable. There's always one thing with those students. They have great background knowledge. So even though they don't get the words automatically, they can kind of fill in the blanks, or they can compensate the mental energy drain by using their background knowledge. Okay. Uh, Comprehension, if you don't have good the vocabulary is poor, the world knowledge is poor, you don't know much, haven't been read through, just haven't been haven't had a lot of life experiences. Those two things will really they wreak havoc on reading comprehension. It's a mystery to me. It's a mystery. It's no mystery at all. A youngster doesn't know meanings of words. That I'm talking about the receptive vocabulary primarily, not the expressive. Reading is a receptive act. He's going to have or she's going to have a comprehension deficit. There's no doubt about it. Uh, how many times do we equate reading with decoding? In fact, I've had over the years, I had a private reading center. I 40 years of professorial work, and in my reading center, I must have tested 4,000 students over the years. I had over 40 years, and sometimes parents would call up, "Hi, Dr. Cavuto. I was recommended to you. Thank you. But my child doesn't read. It's unbelievable. He's a good reader. He just doesn't understand anything." Well, it's not nice to laugh on the phone when people are calling for information, and you can see they're really struggling with this. So I sound professional, I think. I say, listen, so basically you're saying the youngster is good at decoding. He's good at decoding, he reads words fine, he might even be fluent, he just doesn't understand. And exactly. Now again, then I talk about having to bring him in so I can do the whole assessment, et cetera, et cetera. But To say the youngster is a good reader, teaches us to understand it when he reads, if I may, that's an oxymoron. Agree? Reading is all about understanding. But in schools, unfortunately, unintentionally, teachers will sometimes applaud decoding. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the youngster will read a paragraph out loud to the class, second, third grade, and read it fluently, not miss a word, and the teacher will say, beautiful reading, Johnny, Jose, Joe. They shouldn't say that. And I know I'm being picky here, but why should they not say that very simply? Because that gives the reader an idea, the whole class, the idea that my teacher believes that reading is all about sounding good, saying all the words correctly, getting the words correct. That's wrong. That is
Yeah.
not what reading is all about. So what should the teacher say? In my opinion, it's very simple. Teacher should say, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you for reading. Thank you for reading that. Now, tell me about it. Tell me what it said. Huh? By saying that, you're conveying a very important point to the whole class that reading is all about getting meaning. If the youngster says, ah, 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 we really don't know anything, right? Then uh, the youngster didn't read it well, didn't comprehend it. You see, reading is all about, as you well know, comprehension. Okay. So shall I stop there? Do you want to ask? Shall I continue with that, or do you want to ask another?
It's really sad because a lot of kids that are really smart, they just I know that I review books, unfortunately. And you know what gets me is that I'm really smart. I memorized the book.
Yeah.
And what gets me is that sometimes some of the authors can be really nasty and they'll ask me questions about the book when I'm supposed to ask the question just to see if I really read it.
Yeah.
And especially the really famous ones said, why did you choose this? Why did you choose that page? Why did you choose that question? I
Yeah.
go, well, obviously I had to because I thought it was good.
Right.
They actually put you on the spot.
Right.
My little niece, Henley Rose, whenever I get to see her, she reads books at the table in the diner. She won't talk to people.
Mhm.
And then we'll talk about what she's read. She's really smart. But how many kids read and hear the words, and how many kids just read and don't hear what they're saying, even though they're good readers? Teachers don't appreciate that,
Right. Right.
and that's what bothers me.
Yes, yes. In fact, I'm sure you used this term in another one of our talks that we've had in the past. That youngster who reads all the words perfectly sounds
Yeah,
fluent, okay, but when he's done, if the teacher wouldn't congratulate the
yeah,
beautiful decoding, instead say, "Just all right, that was okay. Thank you for reading that. Just tell us about what it read in your own words." Uh, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, it was about a baseball game, and this happened, and that happened." Then the teacher can say, "Beautiful reading." See, in the first case, you're applauding what we call word calling. Word calling is simply when a youngster is just calling out the words, but it's not processing the meaning. Yeah, and how do you know that? It's only one. In my view, you
I
don't even
know.
have to ask questions. It's not even that complex. All you have to say is, "Tell me about what you read." Retelling is a great comprehension assessment. Actually, much better than specific questions. Because if you ask specific questions, the youngster might not know one or two, but he knows a whole bunch that you just didn't ask. Okay? So, uh, again, in my model, we constantly look to see where is there a minus or a plus. It's the kind of a Venn diagram model. And if the youngster, let's take a hypothetical youngster, uh, Jose or Jill, and the youngster can I give him a decoding test, I give her a decoding test, and their grade comes out fifth grade level. Now, fifth grade level, third grade, that's exactly what you'd like. You always want to have a 1 year cushion in decoding. However, what I noticed is what I have to also notice as I'm watching a youngster read the words on the in isolation, which is psychologically invalid, but it's a way of smarting anyway. And I noticed, you know, the youngster read all the words not only up to the fifth grade level well, but also automatically. He didn't have to hesitate. He didn't have to sound out. He didn't have to think 3 o'clock. So that youngster is both decoding accurate and decoding automatic. Now, let's say he was fifth grade level decoding, but he wasn't automatic. He started slowing down terribly at the second grade level. That youngster is going to, I can make a prediction, and that's why I really, all those 4,000 kids I tested, I was the only one who tested them at my office. I did all of the initial assessments. Uh, I found it incredibly interesting. If a youngster is a good decoder, sorry, if a youngster is a poor decoder and he's in third, fourth grade, I, that takes me about 10 minutes to figure out he's going to have or she's going to have severe comprehension problems, just as you or I would have if we were reading Braille text, right? If you can't break the code, you can't comprehend. But also, if the youngster lacks automaticity, he's also going to probably have comprehension problems because the head is spending so much energy figuring out the words, he has to have a comprehension problem. Okay? But that's it's kind of a prediction activity going on. Now, um, if let's say the decoding, I checked it off, and both areas are good, automatic and um, and accurate. Then I look at the vocabulary, and without vocabulary, the background knowledge is way below where it should be, or significant way below how you stated. If that those two areas, they one predicts the other. Uh, um, Receptive vocabulary and the schemato correlate incredibly
Oh, it's
well.
good.
The youngster has really poor scores in those areas. Again, he's going to have comprehension problems. There's no doubt about it. Will I test for that? Of course, but I've already predicted it. I know. Are my predictions sometimes wrong? Without sounding terribly self-serving, not too much. But if I'm wrong, I'll look back to see what happened. Now, let's say, if I may, let's say the youngster is a good decoder, accurate. Let's say he's automatic. Let's say his world knowledge of the world. Do a verbal IQ test, we get that. If you body vocabulary test, it's great to do that. And so I'm checking off all the boxes. Then I give him a reading comprehension test. I don't do the number two pencil test, right? You know that, right? I have the youngster read a paragraph silently. Then I also time him, he doesn't know it. And then after I ask questions, and I get a youngster who had third grade, it's fifth grade level decoding, fifth grade level automaticity, great vocabulary, great background knowledge, but his comprehension, I started him off with a third grade passage because I always try to start easier than what I found out beforehand. And the youngster uh, is just about getting through the third grade passage in terms of the comprehension. The comprehension, usually you want to see about 80% or better, 75% or better. Yeah. So I gave the fourth grade test, and the fourth grade passage silently. By the way, it took him way more time than it should. How come? I'll tell you in a second. But number two, he scored like 2 out of 8 correct. Terrible. Here's, a, here's what's called, that I find this an interesting phenomenon. This is a reading comprehension problem with nothing specific to blame it on.
I'm going to push this closer so I can see.
Okay.
Okay.
I can't blame that problem on decoding. He decoded fine. I can't blame it on vocabulary. His vocabulary was fine. I can't blame it on background knowledge. Background knowledge.
Yeah, I know.
So what do I do? Well, this is where you have to. This I call a comprehension problem with nothing to blame it on. So we do one of a couple of things. If when someone's blind, we could say, there might be something there. You must know that's code, or there might be a learning problem there. You say. Number two, in my view, this is where I really love the teachers have more credit in the teaching of reading, because I know what's happening with that youngster. I know exactly what's happening. I can see inside his head. That youngster is not engaging in what's called meta comprehension strategies.
We got two big ones more to do.
Well, he's not doing those things he should be doing in his head. He's not
Yeah,
self-monitoring himself as he reads. He's not making mental pictures. He's not predicting. Uh, all of those things that you do, Fran, naturally when you read the thousands of books that you have read. Okay, you are engaging in metacom strategies. Now, how do I know this for sure? I don't. But what we do is when we start teaching this youngster, we're going to teach these active processing strategies called meta comprehension strategies. And guess what? Little by little, the youngster starts getting better and better at comprehension. Reading comprehension is an active, aggressive process.
that's right.
And as I said, that's the one that's most often diagnosed.
The problem is that the teachers aren't trained to do anything other than sometimes use the book and just follow the guidelines, and they don't know. So,
Yeah,
but this is the one. The next one, we have two more. The
sure.
next one bothers me the most. I taught classes with children with learning disabilities. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
And I taught some classes that nobody wanted ever to go into. They wouldn't even pick up my kids for reading. They were afraid of them.
Mhm.
And I understood why. They were really interesting. The problems with labels can be students sometimes believe, is there something wrong with me? Do I need a doctor? What's happening? And when teachers turn around and tell them, we don't understand, you're not smart enough, or they say something like that, and I've heard it, I blow a cork. And I mean, my nieces and nephews are smart. I mean, A students, but not everybody is an A student. My nephew's autistic and he reads fine. He's very good. But what do you do when a teacher turns around and says, and I've heard them in classes, I've heard them in the street, I've heard a mother say, you're not smart enough. I said, yes, he is. He has to work at his own level. I'll answer because you know me. So how do you deal with that? And then we have one large one and you get the rest. So how do
Yeah.
you deal with labels? Why is it wrong to say to a child, you can't do this? Why does a child say to you, I'm not smart enough to do it, so I'm not going to read?
Yeah. Excellent questions, Brennan. In fact, if I were to say, is there a question about literacy
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
half century? That's the one. That's
yeah.
so important. We've all heard of the term self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is nothing more than if somebody tells an individual, let's say, just for discussion's sake, because we're discussing for the most part children here, when it comes to adults. When someone tells that youngster you're not smart enough, when someone tells that youngster, we keep this really, well, I think you might have a learning problem. And if then he's taken out of the classroom, goes to the resource room, or actually takes it out of the classroom and puts self-contained, where he's in now his whole education life changes. Instead of being Joey the third grader, he's now Joey the LD child. Right? There's a self-fulfilling prophecy that comes with that. The youngster all of a sudden doesn't see himself as he did before as, okay, I'm not great at reading, but I'm pretty good at math. He really sees himself as not at all able. And when you think you're dumb, when you think you're stupid, or they don't understand especially younger kids, they don't understand the quasi medical diagnoses that we come up with. Not the two of us, but uh, dyslexia, dyspraxia. Uh, yeah, do you remember the central auditory processing problem, Fred? CAP, central auditory processing difficulty, CAPD. That was popular about 10 years ago. All of a sudden, this came out of the blue.
Mm,
You may have a central auditory processing. I had a speech pathologist tell me that. And I said to her, really? She said, yeah, I work on it all the time. The insurance covers it. I said, ah. I said, can you tell me what that means? So he said,
mhm,
come on, George, you know what that means. You're a PhD. I said, I do. But I'm a little embarrassed because I don't know what a central auditory processing difficulty is. She was like, well, it's like processing when you have difficulty processing auditorily. I said, yeah. I said, what I'm having trouble with is youngsters read if they read silently, there's no auditory involved. uh, other than the internal auditory hear the voice in their head, maybe. Good readers don't even hear the voice in their head, they're just going right to meaning. So the essential reading process difficulty, I heard so many kids came into my office with that
Yeah.
diagnosis, and I was always befuddled because I had no flow speech. And I said to her, when she said, well, it means you have difficulty processing. That's a circumlocution. When you define the word by the word, that's not defining it. Fran, it was totally bogus. It was totally bogus. In fact, you will not hear it even discussed anymore. So what happened to all those kids who were labeled having essential auditory processing difficulty? Okay? What happened to all of those kids? Well, they all, to this day, I'm sure they think there's something wrong with them. That's why I have a problem with it. Okay? Are there some children who really have uh, difficulty? Um, let's say a youngster is labeled dyslexic. Um, I had youngsters at my office who I tested them, and I think you can tell just from this conversation, I'm not a big fan of labels. However, I've had some youngsters that I tested, I evaluated, they absolutely were dyslexic. What do I mean by that? They were in third grade. The decoding was, or their third, fourth, fifth, their decoding was 3 years below. Okay? That in and of itself, in my view, doesn't make it dyslexic. Let me go on. But not only was the decoding terrible, all kinds of reversals, B's and D's, P's and Q's, reversing entire words. Huh? R was rat. Huh? And actually, sometimes looking at the right side of the page and proceeding to the left, almost like you're reading Hebrew, huh? Or languages, any languages process from right to left instead of left to right. That youngster, and then I gave a youngster a test where he had to go with Bender. We had to draw figures. The figures were turned upside down. Brent, as much as I don't like the label, that youngster has dyslexia. Okay, and in my view, I still am reticent to say it, but I have to say it because it's there. And I recently, you might find this interesting, now with a woman, lovely woman, incredibly bright, who told me, Dr. Cavuto, and not in my office, which I retired from, uh, but after 40 years. But she said, Dr. Cavuto, she said, I know you're not a big fan of these labels, but I'm dyslexic. Shit, and my whole family is dyslexic. I said, really? I said, no. I said, who made that diagnosis without return? Child
It,
development centers at hospitals, and they diagnose me. I know it. I didn't know. I said, yeah, self evaluations are not good evaluations in my view. But I said, well, Cupido, can you just do something for me? I said, sure. Can you just recite like a few lines of a poem that you like? I said, sure. I said, which poem? Just pick one. We're having lunch. Yeah. So I said, let's see. So many, many years ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden lived there, whom you may know by the name of Annabella. He looked at me and said, okay, you ready? I said, yeah. He recited the whole thing back to me backwards. Backwards, Fran. And she said, would you like me to spell it all backwards? Right, that is unbelievable. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, okay, that's a 15. All right. Somehow she managed to, because she's a lover of language and lover of books, somehow she managed to suffer through and be able to become somewhat of a reader. But I'm not denying the existence of these labels. What I'm saying is we're doing them too, we're giving them out like we're giving out, I don't know, uh, candy. Uh, and the problem is also the system, as you well know, the youngster doesn't get the label, he doesn't get the accommodation. If he doesn't get the accommodation, they can't have things read to him or her. And he can't have things read to him or her. And one youngster in third grade, including in the first grade level, is in deep doo doo. So again, the whole system uh, really pushes towards labeling, and I think that's counterproductive. I really think it's counterproductive. I've had children who came in, and in fact, my mailman was bringing me mail the other day, and he, I, we, for some reason, we changed mailman. We mail people a lot, and he said I was standing at the door, so I walked out to meet him, and he said, handed me my mail. He said, "Are you Doctor Cavuto?" He said, "No." One of the letters on it. I said, "I am." He said, "Are you a real doctor?" I said, "No," because I know what he meant, right? So he said, uh, "PhD." I said, "Very good. That's exactly my time. I have a PhD in." He said, "Hold on, don't tell me. Um, I, tell me your area of specialty." I said, "It's reading, really with an emphasis on psycholinguistics." He said, "Oh my God, you're a reading expert?" I said, "I am." He said, "I'm dyslexic." I said, "You are?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Who made that assessment that you're dyslexic?" He said, "I did." He said, "I did." I said, "You made it yourself?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Let me ask you one question, John." I said, "John, how come if you're dyslexic, my mail, because I'm about 34 and I'm blocked, how come my mail doesn't go to 43? Bring me to the right address." He went, um, I'm not always. I'm not always. I guess he's sometimes dyslexic. Whatever. I don't mean to make light of this. I'm just saying, I do think we are over labeling. Those labels become self
Yeah.
inflicted harms. If someone tells you you've got something wrong with you, you've got something
Well, before I forget, because they'll kill me if I forget. Unfortunately, due to the power outages on Monday,
wrong.
there was no power in this room, there
Mm-hmm.
was no restroom, and there was a very unhappy author. So on Monday, this is going to be interesting. Mike Cameron's going to be here with JB People's lottery ticket. How far would you go for $40 million? He paid 50 cents back that time for a lottery ticket, and his boss absconded with it, and he went to find him because he wanted part of the money. It was scary. On the next day, I had to make up the one from last week, Goodbye Demons, and this one you'll appreciate. The author wrote about two girls in the Peace Corps that set up a reading program for children that had nothing. It's not even poor homes, migrant homes, living in the street, living whatever. They set up it's excellent. Now on the 25th, the number one author in the world, Stephen Manchester, with The Ledger, the inside dope about what really goes on in prisons. And if you're afraid, don't read it.
Yeah.
And on the 29th, Dick Belsky vanishes, and this gets me the best. On August 10th, the number one romance novel in the world that does Berlolian Isles, Tess Gerritsen, will grace me with her presence. And on the 24th, the number one interior designer in the world, Howard Wiggins. And that's just some. And in September, the producer of the Late Night with Stephen Colbert. Don't ask me how.
That's
So
that's an incredible lineup, friend. I'm humbled to be on with you.
yeah, I'm like unbelievable. And here's the last one that we have to do. This is the most important one. Instruction versus explanation. Now, I have my person that does my nails, I won't say her name, cannot read that well. And she complains that she can't read. I said, you can't read because you don't want to. And you don't have to read a book, you can read a magazine. I can give you my new book that's coming out next month also. And if you're brave to read it. No, I don't like to read. I like to cook. I said, that's fine. Why don't you read some recipes and write them? It's discouraging because she's not a kid. And a lot of kids, yet my students, all of them they're older than me. They're in their 60s, half of them, and 50s because I started when I was 10. And they're all amazing doctors, lawyers, advocates, everything. And they remind me every single day that I tortured them. And it makes me happy. So this is the last one. This is the hardest one. Instruction versus explanation. Because sometimes people don't instruct, they just tell. So how does those are the last two, and then you get, I have it over here, you get the last two by yourself. and you said you wanted the last two by yourself. Okay, so how would you explain instruction versus explanation?
Yeah, the I think the best way to explain it is that we need to, if I may, we need to drastically, significantly increase the number of credits that
Mhm.
elementary school teachers are required to take in order to be certified. Same thing with special ed teachers at the elementary and secondary levels. Same thing with administrators. We need to increase the number of courses they take. I don't know if you, I know you know, but your listeners may not know. To be a certified elementary school teacher in New York, you need 6 credits in the teaching of reading. So with 6 credits in the teaching of reading, I'm sorry, but 6 credits does not have anything worth to it. So um, starting with this as a kind of a segue into your question about explanation. Uh, you
Mhm.
can't explain a problem to parents or to a child if you don't have an in-depth understanding of process. You have to have an in-depth understanding of process. That's why when you interview all of those wonderful best-selling authors and experts in different fields, that's why you interview them so well, if I may, without sounding patronizing, because you've read their books. You have an in-depth knowledge of what's going on. That's why you can ask them detailed questions. But if you don't have an in-depth knowledge of reading, you end up, in some cases, not all, but you end up explaining things away by giving a label, by saying he's got this, he's got that. And that's unfortunate. Uh, Again, explaining, I'm going to explain things by doing a little, if I may, short vignette. Fran comes into my office with the youngster. I already, talked to her on the phone. Dr. Cavuto, my child has severe difficulty um, in reading, and nobody's been able to figure out the problem, and they're thinking of putting him in special education. So I test him. I'm listening to James, name. This is James. So I check his decoding Fran, and he's in 5th grade. He's decoding his 2nd grade level. His decoding automaticity is 1st grade level. This is a youngster who, quite honestly, and now what I'm doing is I'm explaining uh, exactly what happened with this young in terms of my evaluation. So that was the decoding test. And by the way, at that point, the youngster stopped making eye contact with me. It was interesting. Before that, when I was chatting with him, what kinds of likes, what kinds of hobbies and what kinds of things he does and he likes. Uh, when I asked him about school, what was your favorite subject? He said gym. And what's your worst subject? Reading. And then he looked around like, what do you think I'm good at reading? But then after that decoding test ran, there wasn't too much I had to determine because I knew his reading comprehension was kind of not going to be good because he couldn't read
Mm.
words. Uh, but I give him a
That's the
listening,
hardest thing.
yeah, but I give him a listening comprehension test. And in the listening comprehension test, he scored 5th grade level. So he
That's what
scored on
mine is
grade level.
too.
Listening comprehension is a wonderful test of reading potential. Where could this youngster be if someone could teach him how to break the code? Huh? If someone could teach him how to break the code, he's a wonderful potential. Huh? Now,
That's
why can't he break the code? Well, I gave him an informal evaluation of auditory integration where you have to put together sounds. Joey, listen, uh, and can you put that together? He said, cat. How about this one? Um, uh, hop. Hop. Can you put those together? Hop. How about this last one? R N Ger. He said, come on, Benjamin. Friend, this youngster who can auditorily integrate that well should be a piece of cake to teach to read. Problem is, that's the problem. But we're going to teach him to read by giving him one-to-one instruction by a teacher who's an expert in reading, who has more than the big six credits. And if I may, for all the teachers listening, I am not at all casting aspersions um, on you and your lack of ability. I'm casting aspersions on the system that only requires you to have six credits. And I am absolutely certain that you're all well intentioned, otherwise, you wouldn't have gone into education. But the point is, you have to have an in depth knowledge of reading to help a youngster like that who is 2, 3, 4 years below reading, below level reading. Without, by the way, easy way to deal with that is slap a label on. Slap a label on. Because when you slap the label on, then he doesn't have to read. His IEP says that everything can be read to him. And then in his classes, things are read to him. He gets a push unlimited time. Those labels are, in my view, counterproductive, unless absolutely necessary. Over 40 years I've had this center, we've had many youngsters who were able to get jobs, and this will be my last statement because we're probably running over. But the reason we're able to get them up is simple. Number one, they were tutored by teachers who had master's degrees in reading at my office, who many of whom I trained and had great students in my class, you being one of them way back when. And secondly, we had the privilege of working one to one with them. And most teachers don't have that. Even in resource rooms, even self-contained, they don't get to work one to one. Usually, they have 2 or 3 aides working with them. And if they get to work, they have 8 kids. And if you get to work one to one, it might be for 10, 15, 20 minutes, but not for a significant amount. So the one to one and an expert teacher, that that is how I would explain how to fix really significant reading problems. And is it doable? Oh yeah, it most certainly is. It's very doable. What's the last thing you want to do? The last thing you want to do is slap a label on them and say, from now on, everything can be read to you. Because that takes away the motivation to read. And as a wiser person than myself said, no one ever got good at reading by not reading. That was Frank Smith, and also he's a
That's hard. No, I have one more,
sure.
and then don't ask where I have to go next. Okay, this is so true because teachers don't understand that if the children are that they don't hear it, they don't want to know. A lot of classes that I've gone into for reading, to do my reading instruction program the last year, and I noticed that I had a teacher on the other side of the room. I couldn't do it because you can't teach with another teacher that's doing something else or singing songs or whatever. And the kids were upset because they actually loved when I came. Now, my students, like I said, are on Facebook. They're all outstanding readers because I make sure they still read. But reading improves through engagement in the process. The more reader, the more we read, the more we engage, the more words they encounter fluent and become more impedantly better than comprehension. And I know that I look at Henley Rose, and she was reading. Well, I got her the books. I get her a series that's on seventh grade level. She's in third grade. And my other nephew Lisa's on second grade, going on fourth grade. And I'll say to her, "Well, Henry Rose, you just read that chapter. What did you read?" And she'll tell it to me. Then we'll read it together. And I only get to see them on Rosh Hashanah. It's the only time I get to see them. And I have to bring books for her. And for my nephew, with Nigel Logan, I have to bring math books and math things. He's five. He's got a sixth grade math level at 5 years old, and he can read. The problem is that not enough parents encourage kids to read, and when they think they can't do it, they tell them don't bother.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that bothers me because my mother made me read when I was two because of my aunt, and the fact that I was smart, bothered everybody also. But to me, reading is power, and I'm upset because the post office hasn't brought my titles. And I finished like three yesterday, even though I didn't want to read. And and I'm getting all the New York Times ones that are not out yet. And the post office, for some reason, isn't bringing them. and that's not good because the publishers are saying they're sending. And yeah, I just finished Jane Ann Krantz Enter the Nightmare. It was interesting, paranormal, and I finished The Vanishes, which is also paranormal and about a guy that's allowed to go kill people and has no remorse. So reading is power. So how would you define the last question? Reading improves through engagement. So it doesn't matter what you read as long as they read.
Yeah, yeah,
And I mean, my mother used to say to me, read Little Women, Little Read this, read um, a series by Beverly Cleary. Go like, Mom, I would rather read the classics. You know, I read To Kill a Mockingbird when I was 10. I read all the hard ones, and I did them with my class and got in trouble. But what's wrong with reading what you like?
yeah. Absolutely not. Not only is there nothing wrong with it, but that's
Yeah,
exactly what we should be doing. We should be feeding into their interests, right,
yeah,
Fred? We all like to read that which we like. But may I, as my probably my last statement because we're running out of time, but there's something called the Matthew effect in reading, and Keith Stanovich at Stanford came up with coining that phrase, the Matthew effect in reading, from the book of Matthew, all right, from the book of Matthew, and basically this is the Matthew effect in reading. Children who are good at reading like to read. Because they like to read, they read. Because they read, they get better at it. Because they get better at it, they read
yeah,
more. Because they read more, huh? They get even better at it. Now let's take the opposite. This is what we're talking about mostly with struggling readers. Struggling readers, because they have difficulty, they don't like to read. Because they don't like to read, they don't read. Because they don't read, they get even worse at it. Because they get even worse at it, they really dislike reading. It's a vicious cycle. Kind of like most things in life. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's the actual uh, uh, not exact translation of the biblical verse of the Matthew from the book of Matthew. And in my view, we have
yeah.
to mitigate the Matthew effect. We have to somehow get children who are not good at it. We have to somehow enable them. How do we enable them? By really, really knowing, having an in-depth understanding of reading processes, and share those with the youngster on a one-to-one basis. When I finish with a youngster in third grade who can't read at all, and I do a language experience story with him about something he told me about that he might like dinosaurs or fishing. Let's say fishing. I went fishing. I went with Dad. We caught 3 fish. We broke one of our fishing rods. We had a good time. And I act as a scribe. I write it down in a book form. I said, come on, you're going to read that. He said, but I can't read. I said, sure you can. And basically, because it's his experience, little by little, I can get him to keep telling him the words he can't get. Sometimes having him predict the words. It's amazing because it's his story. By the way, this is the language experience approach, LEA, a beautiful way to convince youngsters who think they can't read that they can. In fact, when I do that with the youngster, he leaves the office, big smile on his face, and mom says, I don't know what you did. Please, I'm being self-serving here.
I got one more question because we got 2 minutes.
Sure.
When do you want to do the next one?
When your choice, my lady. You have a big lineup, so you let me know what's best for you.
Okay. So let me know what month is okay because I have nothing in August or September.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was going
October,
to say,
okay?
yeah, we probably should. That's fine. I think we probably should go to maybe beginning October.
Okay, just tell me what month is better for you. August, not August, September or October.
I could do either September or October. September might be
Okay,
good
so
because it's the beginning of the school year.
yeah, I know I have one on the 23rd and I have one on the 29th. I could do, this is hard because it's Passover, whatever. No, Passover, Rosh Hashanah. I have one in October on the 14th.
How about
I
September
have one on
23rd,
the,
Fran?
I could do one more in September on the 30th. Does that work?
That works.
Okay, I'm gonna put that in there. If I have to change it, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay. Now let me